Hello and welcome to episode 226 of Page One, the Writers Podcast. I'm Tarek.
I'm Marco, and thanks for joining us on the podcast where we like to speak to writers of all kinds about their writing careers, find out how they got into the industry and try and get as many hints and tips from them as possible. And we have a huge back catalogue of guests, as Tarek has just said. This is episode 226, which means there's 225 guests there. And also, you can also find in our feed the Drafting Notes podcast, which is a sort of a shorter form podcast where Tarek and I discuss one aspect of writing. That is a timed exclusive for our Patreon subscribers. You get that months early on there. On the Patreon as well, you also get bonus bits
free books.
You get free books and stuff at different tiers, but also you get early access to these episodes and things like bonus bits with authors talking about their 5 books that have influenced their writing and things like that. So, yeah, do check out the Patreon if you haven't already. But this week's guest, who is someone that does speak to us for that extra bit on Patreon, was really good fun to speak with.
Yeah, it was great fun chatting to this week's guest, Callie Taylor, a.k.a. CL Taylor, depending on if she's in her chicklit mode or her dark, horrible crime mode. A really interesting route in. Callie began writing chicklit novels, Heaven Can Wait, Home for Christmas, back in 2009. And then interesting switcheroo pivot into dark crime novels after psychological thrillers. Yeah, and she's published, I think, 9 or 10 of them since then. Like really impressive, one a year, boom, boom, boom. They're all really high quality. She's done some young adult novels in there as well. A real nice range of stuff, show that you can cover quite an interesting variety of genres, I think, if you're
and her latest one is just out, as we discussed on the podcast, and she's also got a really, I think it's probably the most unique story about how she got her agent.
Brutal phone call.
A slightly scary one, but it all worked out in the end. So yeah, it's a really fun and interesting chat. So yeah, we will get straight into it after a quick advert for our writer's notebook, and then we'll be back at the end of the podcast with a bit more chat and to let you know about next week's guest.
But for now, on with the podcast.
The blank page. To some, it's terrifying, an obstacle to overcome. But we prefer to think of it as an opportunity, a blank canvas to be filled with all of the adventures and characters in our head. So how to overcome that fear? Well, we all know the best advice for a writer is write. Seriously, get words on the page and more will follow.
But what about later, when you start trying to pull those threads of what you've written together? What about the character you wrote about way back at the start? Who was she again? What was she carrying? And where did she leave the MacGuffin that she now really needs in the third act? Think about all those top thrillers you like to read, or that amazing drama you just watched. What did they all have in common? Structure and planning.
As aspiring writers ourselves, we've tried many different methods to try and organise all the thoughts about the stories we want to tell. We've been there searching for a piece of scrap paper to note something down, or making a quick note on our phone in between meetings.
Or sometimes we'll make a note in whatever notebook we're carrying, or a document on our laptop so we don't forget that great idea. Let's be honest, it can all be a bit messy and it's easy to lose track of everything. And that's when we realised it's not just a story that needs structure and planning, but the way we gather all of our thoughts about it as well.
And so we made Page One. Page One is more than just another notebook. It's a place to put down all your ideas for your latest project, divided into easy-to-use sections that will help you plan your story, so that when that blank page comes calling, you're ready to answer. And then afterwards, once it's written, we realised you need to plan how to let people read it, so we included a section relating to submissions.
Each one is designed for one project, whether you want to write a book, screenplay, a comic, or any other kind of story. We truly believe that when you use it, it will help you get to the main event, writing your story. So we hope this helps.
We can't wait to read what you come up with.
And remember, every story starts with page one.
Did you always want to be a writer?
I did. I wanted to be a writer from the age of 8. I fell in love with the book, The Magic Faraway Tree by Enid Blyton, and it really sparked my imagination. I'd never read anything like it. And I wanted to be able to write something where readers could lose themselves in my story. But I did send some stories I'd written off to Ladybird Publishers when I was about 11. And I received my first ever rejection letter.
There you go. Get started early.
Yeah.
Ladybird, they were everywhere when I was a kid. They were massive, weren't they?
Yeah. Huge. I was really inspired by, there was an author called Jane Fisher. She was 9. And she had the garden. I know. Can you believe it? She must have known someone in publishing, or her parents did. But she wrote The Garden Gang. I don't know if either of you are old enough to remember those.
Don't know
But they had various fruits and vegetables, and she wrote them and illustrated them. And
She illustrated them as well.
Yeah, she did, and the illustrations were really good. I mean,
Wow, I'm going to look at this.
yeah. Look, I bought some actually on eBay a while ago to look at them again. And they don't look like the drawings of a 9-year-old to me.
No, I'm looking them up. I'm looking at them right now. No way with those drawn by 9-year-olds. No chance. That's a total scam.
Yeah, exactly.
Brilliant.
But yeah, it inspired me. I thought, well, if another child can do it, why not me? But apparently the publisher had more than enough books. And try again.
But despite those ambitions, you went to uni to study psychology.
I did, which wasn't the original plan. The original plan was to study English literature and drama. But strangely, after I put in my UCAS form, I got no offers, nothing, not from any unis, not from any polys. And, everybody in my year was getting at least, a handful of offers. So it was really strange, and I didn't know what was going on until one of my friends broke into the careers office at school and found all the UCAS forms, and she gave me mine, and the teachers had completely missed off all my grades, my predicted grades. So, of course, I was an automatic rejection. And so I had to take It was. I mean, I couldn't say anything. I couldn't dob my friend in, but I was literally the only girl in my whole year not to get an offer. So I had no choice but to take a gap year, which wasn't as fun as it sounds, because my mum made me do a secretarial admin course.
Oh, God. I'd be dobbing that friend in like that.
Yeah, I know. While all my friends were travelling, I was learning T-line and touch typing. I mean, the latter's come in useful, but that's about it. But I got my grades. I didn't do as well as expected, and I thought, you know what? I've always been interested in psychology as well. I'll apply for psychology, and I ended up at the University of Northumbria.
And were you writing on the side at that point?
No, only miserable poetry. I think, like a lot of teens, I poured all of my angst into really, really, really bad poetry. I actually burned the book about 20 years ago because I thought, if anybody finds this, they're going to think I was the most miserable person alive. So it's not what I want to be remembered for.
But you did then start doing some short stories, and you won a couple of competitions back in 2006.
Yeah, I didn't write for the longest time because I assumed that, after my rejection aged 8, slightly burnt.
You held on to that for a long time.
Exactly. I don't take rejection well. No. I thought that people who were writers were, Oxbridge educated, from posh families, and knew people in publishing, and I wasn't any of those things. But I saw a programme on the TV run by BBC Get Writing, which was a competition for people at home to finish short stories that famous people had started. And I really liked the one by Joanne Harris. It was quite sort of absurd and unusual. So I wrote the ending to it, showed it to a mate from work in the pub after work, and he didn't laugh, so I thought that was a good thing. I sent it off, and I didn't win, but it gave me the bug to start writing short stories and entering them into competitions. And I did it, just my own way for ages, was getting absolutely nowhere, wasn't even getting shortlisted. And I noticed that a lot of the winners were all from this online short story boot camp. And funnily enough, the author, Dan Malakin, he was also part of this boot camp with me. And it was a real baptism by fire. I mean, the number of times that I cried, getting feedback for my short stories, they were all anonymized. But the leader of the boot camp was particularly brutal in his feedback. So, when I got my first 1-star Amazon review for my books, it was nothing compared to what I went through there.
I mean, when you're getting that sort of frank or even brutal feedback at that stage of your writing career, how did it make you question whether you wanted to continue doing it, or was the bug already there?
I think I was just too determined. I really wanted to get better. I mean, and this has continued through my whole career. I just wanted to be the best writer that I could be. And I was frustrated that, I wasn't getting high scores from the group for my short stories. But then miraculously, one of my stories that the leader of the group had rated really low won a competition. And I thought, well, maybe he doesn't know everything. Maybe it's a bit more subjective. And I'm not as bad as I might think, or he might think. And I just kept on. It gave me such a thrill, not just winning short story competitions, but getting stories chosen for anthologies. Like some were literary anthologies, some were e-zines. I wrote for some of the women's magazines, and they were great because they paid. So 180 quid for a short story. At the time I was really, really skint. So, part of it was motivated by that. I can make money this way. Not much, but
Yeah. And so short stories, and then when did you decide to try your hand at writing something longer?
Well, I had tried. I've just remembered I had tried when I was a couple of years earlier than that, when I was living in London. I was probably about 24, 25. And this is how old I am. I didn't have a computer at home. I had an electronic typewriter. So that course came in really useful, and you had to use it. And I tried to write a book. It was partly inspired by my psychology degree. It was to do with like the difference between sanity and insanity. And it was about one male character who was sane and his friend who was insane. But I knew nothing. I'd never been in a psychiatric unit. I didn't know anybody who worked in a psychiatric unit. And I wrote about 2,000 words and just ground to a halt. So I put that on the back burner. And then it wasn't until, I was 33. And one of my friends from school died really suddenly, really unexpectedly. She had a brain aneurysm. So she had a terrible headache on the Thursday, went into hospital, had some operations, and then very sadly by the Sunday she had multiple strokes and died. And that was the first. It is like scared the out of me, to be honest. And she was the first young person that I'd ever known who died, and it lit a fire in me. And I just thought, I think the reason I'd put off writing a novel for so long was because I was scared it was going to get rejected. And this lifelong dream that I'd had would never happen. But when Lucy died, I thought, I have to do it. Something like that could happen to me. So I wrote like a whirlwind. I wrote after work. I wrote every weekend, and I finished the first draft in 3 months and 3 weeks. Wow. And it was a supernatural romantic comedy.
Covering a lot of bases. I like it.
Yeah. It was
just what publishers are after.
Exactly. But I thought, okay, so I'd been kind of following what was going on in publishing, or as much as I could from reading Writing magazine, because I didn't know the bookseller existed then. I knew that romantic comedies had been around for ages, and they seemed to be sort of waning a little bit. But there were loads of films and TV programs that were like supernatural romantic comedies, and I thought there's a gap in the market here, and maybe I'm the person to fill it. so I did get my deal. I got a 2-book deal with Orion, but there's a reason that nobody else was writing supernatural romantic comedies, because they didn't sell.
So is this Heaven Can Wait?
That's right. Heaven Can
Right,
Wait.
okay.
Yeah, 2009 that was published.
Right, okay. Because I was looking at I kind of look at a hand, and I saw those 2 books at the very start, and I was like, is this the same Callie Taylor? Because they're very different books than the rest of your kind of psychological thrillers.
Yeah, exactly. They are. I think because I'd read quite a lot of romantic comedies and stuff in my late 20s, which was a big change from the kind of stuff that I was reading in my early 20s, when I was reading much more kind of literary highbrow stuff. And I saw in the back of a Lisa Jewell book, I think her first book, Ralph's Party, she'd written that she'd been on holiday with a friend, and her friend had dared her to write 3 chapters of a book, and she'd take her out for dinner if she did it. And Lisa was like an admin assistant or a receptionist or something. Mm-hmm. And I thought, oh, wow, that's like me. That was the kind of job that I was doing at the moment. And I just thought that made publishing feel a lot more accessible. Like, if Lisa Jewell could write a book as a bet and get it published, then maybe I could write a book. And so I thought rom-coms were the way to go, because I'd read so many of them. But it was terrible timing. It was right at the end of, as they were really tailing off and losing popularity. So the timing was bad for that, but it was much better for my psychological thrillers, which came next.
And when, I suppose it might have been around that time, but how did you find your agent?
I did it the old-fashioned way. I bought a copy of the Writers and Artists Yearbook, and I looked through it for authors that I recognised the name of, best-selling authors, and I drew up a short list of 6. Johnny Geller, Darley Anderson, Jane Gregory, and Lizzie Kramer, some others, and I sent them the covering letter, three chapters and a synopsis, and waited. And Johnny Geller was a no. Jane Gregory was a no. Lizzie Kramer said this book wasn't for her, but to get in touch again if I wrote something else. And then Darley Anderson phoned me.
Ooh,
and
wow.
and I was really excited. And he said that he wanted to read the full manuscript on an exclusive basis. And I was just like, oh my God, this is amazing. This is amazing. So I sent it off to him. And then I had the longest wait. It was, it has to have been at least 2 months. I mean, which probably in agenting terms isn't that long, but
no,
to me,
it's a long time
like
when
forever.
you're, yeah.
Exactly. And in those days, if you did send off a full and they didn't want it, they would send it back. So it would just plop through your letterbox. And if they did want to represent you, they'd call you. So the phone went one day and it was Darley again. And my heart raced. I was just like, oh, this is it. This is when he offers me representation. And then he proceeded to completely rip the book apart.
Oh my God.
Joking. Oh my God.
And I was just sitting there, and I had tears just streaming down my face.
Geez.
Like, who is this cruel man that would ring me up
That is
and
awful.
destroy, what I've worked on for so long? And he said, it's supposed to be a romantic comedy, but it's really ponderous. And I didn't know what ponderous meant. Looked it up later, and it was boring.
Who's got the time to do this? I mean, I thought agents were meant to be busy. He's carving time in his diary to phone someone up and rip them a new one.
Exactly. So at the end of the phone call, I sort of said, so I'm assuming that you don't want this
to know then.
and he went, I wouldn't have called you if that was the case. And I went, sorry? And he said, no. He said, it has potential, but you need to do a damn lot of work on it to get it up to publishing standard. Go away, study the best-selling books in the genre, make it less boring, make the funny bits funnier, and then send it back to me. And I was like shell-shocked. I'd never heard of this happening, somewhere in between rejection and acceptance. So put the phone down, cried some more, and then I sulked for about a week because I just didn't know what to do. And then I thought, no, sod it. No one else is interested. I'm going to rewrite this book. So I went to Waterstones and I looked at all of the best-selling books, and the one that had the biggest buzz around it at the time was Can You Keep a Secret by Sophie Kinsella. And so I bought a copy and I went through it. So I read it once just to, get a feel for the story. And then I read it again with a highlighter and post-it notes. And everywhere that she made me laugh, I underlined it. Anytime I was desperate to keep reading, I underlined it or put a post-it note. And basically, by studying Sophie Kinsella's book, I learned about the rule of 3 of comedy, which I didn't know before. But by seeing how she made me laugh, I was like, oh, yeah, you do the setup and then the whatever and then the punchline. And also, she was really good at ending each of her chapters with a kind of cliffhanger and then really drawing you in with the first few lines of the next chapter. So I rewrote my book. I probably spent 7 months rewriting it. I even made like a table in Word where I pasted the last line of each chapter and then the first line of the next one, so I could sort of evaluate them to see how effective they were. And then I sent it back, and I waited even longer this time. It must have been getting close to like 11, 12 weeks. And then I got a phone call, but it was from a woman, and it was Madeline Milburn. And at the time, she was Darlene Anderson's head of foreign rights. She said that Darley had given her the manuscript to read when she was on a long train journey to Scotland, and she'd absolutely fallen in love with it. And she asked Darley if she could represent me. And so I became her first client.
Wow. Oh, wow. I didn't realize that. Your first ever client, Madeline Milburn.
Yeah, and now she's the mega agent that she is. Not due to me, obviously.
But she wouldn't be where she is today without that.
Exactly. God, that's the most unique story. I think we've had a lot of different stories about how people got agents, but that's a unique one.
Yeah.
God, that phone call. I mean,
I know.
I'm actually like shaking just thinking about that.
So you brought out these 2 romantic comedies, and then what, apart from maybe the sales of them, had you always wanted to try your hand at a different type of story, at the psychological thriller type thing?
Well, the psychological thriller switch. I got all the good luck in the beginning of my career. That came about because I was dropped by my editor.
All right, okay.
Okay, oh, jeez, right. That was okay.
Yeah, it's never a straight move, straight line.
Was that because of sales? Were they just not happy with the sales?
Well, the thing is that when the first book came out, I said to. So I was acquired by an editor and then given to another editor for paperback. I don't know if they were planning on bringing out a hardback and changed their minds, but it went straight to paperback. So I said to my paperback editor, how many copies are you hoping to sell? And she says, for a debut, 10,000 paperbacks would be great. So I was like, excellent. And but I didn't know what the print run was. I didn't know what the retail sub was. I think it was in WH Smith's and maybe one supermarket. And I remember, and I cringe at my naivety and innocence, I remember the week after it came out, buying the Sunday Times, desperately looking through to see.
Will it be number 1 or number 7?
This must be the wrong.
Yeah, misprint.
I was so naive. I mean, the internet wasn't what it is now, and there are podcasts like yours, and people don't write very revealing tell-all blogs and stuff, or do YouTube or TikTok about publishing. So I was really clueless, and I thought it was a level playing field, and that everybody had an equal chance of becoming a Sunday Times bestseller.
But that's it. The whole industry is really it's indecipherable sometimes, and it is quite locked down, and from the outside it is hard to know exactly what's going on in there. Like how does it all work, and the reality.
Even
I think
on the inside,
obvious.
I think sometimes.
Yeah, even on exactly. Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, no, I think I think new writers now are more clued up. You know, they devour everything that can give them any kind of insight.
Yep.
But I had no one to ask. I was vaguely aware. I vaguely knew a few published authors, but only because we all had blogs. And these published authors would write on their blogs, and I might comment and stuff. But that was the only information I was getting. But it was all very whitewashed and, you know, positive and perky. So I didn't know any of
the truth wasn't exactly easy to come
the
across.
dark side of publishing.
The reality. So you did like a pivot towards psychological thriller, crime novel stuff. Was that like obviously a conscious choice to say, well, this is what I want, this is where the market is going, or this is what I would actually prefer to be writing? What was the thinking behind that movement?
Not really. It was so when I was dumped by my editor, she said, you know, what if you want to continue to be published by us, what I would like is something that's a bit like a Jojo Moyes novel or a Richard and Judy book club pick. Okay. And I thought,
what we'd like is a bestseller, please.
Yeah.
Could you remember that? I'm looking for a number one bestseller.
You've maybe not thought about this path, but could you write as a bestseller?
If you thought was something that writing something that sells, just an idea.
Exactly.
Wonderful advice.
I was just, I felt screwed. I was like, you know, it's game over. It's game over. And so what happened was, so when I found this out, I had just had my son. So my son was probably about 3 months old, and I was on maternity leave, and I didn't know what to do, but I had won a competition the previous year run by the Romantic Novelists Association to write a opening chapter on the theme of keeping a secret. And my mind went to dark places in this, and I wrote this chapter about a woman who's by her teenage daughter's bedside, and her daughter's just stepped in front of a bus, and not knowing why her daughter would do that, the mum goes through the daughter's room and finds a diary, and in it says, "Keeping the secret is killing me." And it was like, you know, the darkest thing that I'd written, and I thought, romance competition, never gonna win. There wasn't even any kissing, and it won. It actually won.
Oh, right, okay.
Brilliant.
I don't know. I don't know how, but it won. And the head of the RNA back then said to me at the award ceremony, "What happens next? This is great potential for romantic suspense." Now, I didn't know what romantic suspense was, and there wasn't any romance in it, so I kind of parked it. But when I was on maternity leave with my son, I was like pushing him around in the pram, trying to get him to sleep and listening to audiobooks. And I listened to Before I Go to Sleep by S.J. Watson.
Yep.
And Into the Darkest Corner by Elizabeth Haynes. And I was blown away. Like, these were stories that I hadn't read before, with female protagonists, and there was a darkness to them, and the women had to try and work out what was happening. And I just thought, this is a bit like my opening chapter. And, you know, I think other than Gone Girl, these were the biggest books within the genre at the time. And I just got that feeling like maybe this is a good time to try writing the rest of this book to see if it is what I think it is. So I did. I wrote it over my maternity leave, and I sent it to my agent. And, you know, she said, it's the best book you've ever written. And she sent it out on submission, and it got rejected and rejected and rejected. Oh, you know how an agent has a list of sort of, you know, their A and their B. And yeah. I mean, no offense to my publisher that I did sign with, but they weren't in the first list. And it got to a point that I'd had so many rejections that I almost thought I couldn't bear it anymore, and I was going to tell her to pull the book, and I'd write something else. But then Avon, which is a commercial imprint of HarperCollins, offered for it. Very, very small deal. But I sort of resignedly went, okay. I mean, it sounds really ungrateful, but I was really disappointed because Maddie had said it was so good. And I knew that when you get a small deal, the chances of that book doing well and selling well and being a Sunday Times bestseller or whatever are, not much greater than nil, really, because they won't have the marketing spend. But Avon did get really behind it, and they were quite innovative in the boxes that they made for bloggers, with the book in it and these extra bits and bobs, and they created quite a lot of hype. And while it didn't go Sunday Times top 10, it sold about 50,000 paperbacks, and it sold 200,000 ebooks.
Wow.
Well, that's fantastic numbers, yeah.
Yeah, and finally in my career, I got the timing right, because Avon were one of the first publishers to reduce the cost of ebooks, and they put The Accident out at 69p. Right, and because there weren't loads of psychological thrillers, and because it was so cheap, it just sold and sold and sold.
Fantastic.
And before the second book had even come out, they gave me a new 3-book deal for considerably more money than the first one.
Brilliant.
Excellent.
And that was the start of you've had, since then you've had what, 9, 10 novel, and really like every year, it's very consistent. You've had one pretty much every year, I think, since 2014 when The Accident came out, and funnily enough, having said that, 2019 Sleep was picked for the Richard Judy Book Club, so, so you got there in the end.
Exactly. When was that conversation? At the beginning of 2012. So, it took 7 years, but I got there in the end.
That must have been pretty satisfying.
Oh, that phone call was one of the best. From bad phone calls to the phone call I got from my editor telling me I got Richard and Judy, I was just like, yeah.
And what kind of impact, because I think 2019 you had Richard Judy Book Club selection and Sarah Cox on ITV. And how much of an impact do these big profile things have? I'm assuming it's massive. And is that the case?
I think at the time, Richard and Judy, so I think at its peak, Richard and Judy, when they were on television, they had a phenomenal impact on sales. Books would easily sell 250,000 paperbacks off the back of Richard and Judy.
Wow.
By the time I got it in 2019, they weren't on TV anymore.
Okay.
And it wasn't quite so powerful, but there was definitely an uplift in sales, because when you get Richard and Judy, obviously W.H. Smith stock loads of copies. And it's in W.H. Smith Travel, and it's in it's in the airports, and it's on the high street. So there's loads and loads of copies, and it's all got excellent visibility up front in store. So it made a difference, certainly. With the Sarah Cox show that I did on Channel 5, that was an interesting one, because it was me and Ricky Wilson from the Kaiser Chiefs, and it sounds so surreal to even say it. My imposter syndrome was huge. I got Ricky Wilson from the Kaiser Chiefs on one side, and then I've got Ross Kemp, Grant from EastEnders on the other side. And they're seasoned pros. They've done millions. And even though it was pre-recorded, I thought can I swear on this?
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
I thought I was going to shit myself. I was so oh God, it was awful. But Sarah was lovely, and she had a big stack of my books next to her and talked through them, and somehow I made my way through it. But in the end of the show, what we all had to do, all three of us, was recommend a book to the audience. So I can't remember who the other two recommended, but I recommended what's it called? Rubbernecker by Belinda Bauer. And I gave this really passionate sort of, speech about why I loved it and what a brilliant book it was.
Yeah.
And then I waited for the show to be aired, and out of curiosity, I was like looking at the ranking, my Amazon ranking, to see how much impact it might make. And sure enough, it did, my ranking did improve, and books were obviously being sold on the back of this show. But when I looked at Belinda Bauer's Rubbernecker that I had so passionately sold, it was like in the top 5 sold books on Amazon. So I think the secret to selling books really well on television is get somebody else to sell it to the audience and not your own.
The latest novel is It's Always the Husband.
Well,
Do you want to give us the pitch for that one?
yeah, sure. So I describe It's Always the Husband as Big Little Lies meets The Staircase, the Netflix show.
Nice.
And it's about a woman called Jude who moves to a new town with her young daughter. And the school mum clique all ignore her at the school gates. But she gets chatting to this man called Will, who her daughter becomes best friends with Will's daughter. So they spend a lot of time together. And then one evening they accidentally get drunk and sleep together and, begin a sort of little affair. And suddenly the school mums take a lot of notice in Jude, invite her round for drinks one evening and tell her that they suspect that Will killed his first wife and was responsible for the disappearance of the second.
Oh, nice.
A good setup. I like it.
Yeah, excellent comparisons as well. That's
Yeah.
excellent stuff to have. No, that sounds very good. And I want to ask about how you write these books, because and whether this process has changed over time, because like I read that you talk about having a kind of what if scenario. That's your kind of starting point, and you always have that, and then it's from that you kind of build outwards from character and stuff. Is that still how you approach writing books?
Yeah, pretty much. I think The Accident was the only book where I heard the first few lines of the book, sort of the character saying them in my head, sort of thing. And I've wanted that to happen ever since, because I wrote like wildfire when, having the voice first. But since then, that's not happened. And it is typically a what if. And then from there, I populate it with the characters. And I think about what the character's goal is, each of the character's goal, what their flaw is that stops them from reaching the goal, what their past is, how what happened in the past shaped them into the person that they are now. And I typically know the ending, and I use the book by Alexander Sokolov, Stealing Hollywood.
Oh, yeah.
And I use the 4-act structure, and I've got a big whiteboard in my office, and I'll plot the first act pretty densely. I know exactly what happens in the first act, and then I'll know what happens in the second act climax, the midpoint twist, the third act climax, and the ending. But often I won't know that final twist, and all the stuff in between, because I've tried loads of things. I read that James Patterson outlines his novels. And I thought, well, he's a multi-millionaire. I'll give that a go.
That's probably about as close as he gets to actually writing a book, I think.
Exactly. but for me, outlining just took all the joy out of writing, because one book I outlined 5,000 words, which was fine. The next book I outlined was 13,000 words. And I just felt like I'd already written it, but a very short version. So when I came to write the full draft, I was bored. So that didn't work. And then with the 4-act structure, I noticed that I kept going off piste once I'd written the first act. So I thought, well, why not just, plot the first act and know a few little stepping stones towards the end and go that way, because otherwise I'm just wasting my time plotting stuff that I'm never going to write.
Yeah.
So...
And with a 4-act structure, obviously there's the most common one that people know is the 3-act structure, and then there's the 5-act structure. I think there's a 7-act structure as well. But can you break down very briefly what the 4-act structure, how that works?
Yeah, so the 4-act structure is basically the 3-act structure, but with the second act split into 2.
Right.
Okay. Right.
And then each act has 2 sequences. So there are 8 sequence climaxes, which I think means that there are more points in the book where something exciting happens.
Yeah.
So instead of just the end of Act 1, the end of Act 2, the end of Act 3, you've got 8 spread across, which hopefully, keeps the surprise and the excitement going.
I think I quite like that. As you say, even if you're not, and that sounds similar to the way I write as well, which is kind of have a kind of rough starting point of what's happening, and then a few bits on the way, and maybe a kind of end point to aim for. But beyond that, just kind of exploring and letting it kind of run where it wants to run. And I think having, the way you talk about breaking down that second act into 2 halves and having points of excitement littered throughout the whole book, I've often thought we talked to someone before, I think, and who said kind of just having every 10,000 words or so having something happening, just making sure that things aren't dragging, getting too slow. There's always that kind of pace is kept up, and you're keeping the reader hooked, and they're getting pulled along the narrative. And it's quite important, isn't it, to keep that pace structure.
And Alexandra's book is based on how films are structured, and obviously most films, commercial films anyway, have to hit those beats to keep the audience watching. And fair enough, that's typically just a sort of 1.5 to 3 hour film. So they've got less time to fill than us. But I think anything where you can ensure that you've got these big moments that keep the reader on their toes, so your plot doesn't sag and the reader doesn't lose interest, it is a good thing, in commercial fiction at least.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, doing it that way, that you don't have a detailed plan. You know where you're wanting to go, and you know that with the structure, there's certain beats that you want to hit. But how does that equate to the sort of first draft? Do you have a clean first draft at the end of it, or does the writing come in, on that second draft and revising it to make it all line up in the way that you want?
No, I'm a really clean writer. Slow but clean. So what I'll typically do, I can't, if I get a certain way through my book and I realise that something earlier on is no longer working, or there's an issue with it, because what happens in the majority of the book is character led. It's only when I'm writing the book that I really get to know the characters. I can't just keep writing and ignoring the fact that the beginning needs to change. I don't know if it's because I can't trust my memory to go back and do it in a second draft, or if it's a kind of perfectionist streak, or what it is about me, but I'll have to go back and I'll rewrite that before I write any more. What it does, even though it's quite frustrating, because I see other authors online just banging out drafts in like 8 weeks, dirty draft done, 8 weeks, and I'm like, I'm so envious. It probably takes me 5 months to do my first draft, but the upside is, and also because to get me into a day's writing excuse me, I will go back over what I wrote the previous day. And tweak it, maybe read the dialogue aloud or something, and that way I get myself back into the story before I have to hit that blank bit of page and continue it. But that means that I'm just tightening up the prose to an extent that when I finish the book, all I really need to do then is just read it out loud to catch any clunkiness and just make minor tweaks, and then off it goes to my agent and my editor.
It's interesting because I'm actually, I would say that I probably like planning more than you and Tarek, but I'm exactly the same as you in terms of I can't continue. If I know there's something that I need to change, I find it very difficult to press on with the story. And I think the reason that I do it is I need to make sure the solution that I'm thought of is going to work, because otherwise I think, well, if that doesn't work, then everything else I'm going to write is going to need changed as well. So
exactly,
that's sort of
it's more work down the line
process,
if you don't.
I think.
Exactly. No, exactly.
Yeah. And I often don't come up with my twists until the very last minute as well. I mean, I'll know, who the bad guy is and why or whatever, but I like to end my books with at least one twist that catches the reader unawares, but needs to be seeded into the story. So in theory, it's guessable. So I'll often get really, really close to the end. I think with It's Always the Husband, I was about 5,000 words away from the end. And I was like, I haven't got my twist. I haven't got my twist. And I was like panicking. And I was like, oh, I can't just end it on this. And then it just came to me. And I was like, oh, okay, I know what my twist is. And then I go back and I'll seed in or change things and tweak it so that the twist doesn't come from nowhere and that it works. And it's a euphoric feeling when I get that twist, but also absolutely terrifying in the run up to it when I'm like, I don't have it. And then, yes,
Yeah, it's amazing that your brain can do that, isn't it? That you can sort of be stuck or worrying about where it's going, but suddenly something in your brain will give you the solution, and it's like pieces falling into place along the story. It sort of works well. Yeah.
And I think also it's if it surprises you, then it surprises readers. I think that's exactly.
I've written books before where I've been partway through and I've thought, this is the villain, and I'm working my way up. This is the villain, and I've got partway through, and I thought, actually, no, it'd be better if it's this person.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had comments from readers going, I really thought it was X person. And I was like, so did I. About 3/4 of the way through.
And I wanted to ask you about because obviously you kind of let the plot, you kind of discover the plot as you're writing, but it sounds like you have a strong grasp of characters from the start, and so you know where you're going, and so that kind of helps you. You let them kind of bounce and respond to what's going on, and that helps you guide through the plot. But then, like I read about every move you make, which is based kind of on your own experiences to some extent. And I mean, and that was that a difficult book to write, but given the characters were kind of based on real experiences that you might have had.
Yeah. So for anybody who doesn't know, every move you make is about 4 victims of stalking who meet on a online support group, and when they realise they all live in London, they meet up and they decide to place trackers on each other's stalkers in order to stay safe after one of them is killed. And I was stalked myself about 17 years ago by an ex-boyfriend, and the inspiration for that was that the only control I had in that situation is that I had a stat counter on my website. And because I had tagged the IP address when I'd worked on my website at his home or viewed my website at his home, if he was looking at my website, then it would show up with his name and then home. It also recognised the name of where he worked. So that would also show up in the list of IP addresses. So the only control that I had was if I was in my house, in my flat in Brighton, and I checked the IP address and he was looking at my website right now in London, which is where he lived and worked, then he wouldn't be outside my door or he wouldn't be down the street.
Okay.
So it was a bit of technology that gave me a little bit of freedom. And so I decided to use technology to allow these fictional victims of stalking to fight back. And it was a really hard book to write because there's 4 point of view characters and they're all being stalked. They're all in different scenarios, but the situation is the same. The fear is the same. And so I never got a break. Often when you have different point of view characters, you can go, oh, I like this one. They're the funny one. Or I like this, for whatever reason. But although I did try and put a little bit of humour into the book, my editor made me pare it right back.
Oh, really?
So it was, because I gave one of them a boyfriend who was a comedian. So I was just like, this could help. And she was like, this probably inappropriate time for someone to be cracking a joke. I was like, all right then. So it was hard, like drawing on my own experiences and my fear and going to a dark place in my head. And so it's no coincidence that It's Always the Husband is a much lighter book in tone, and there are jokes in it and there are wisecracks, but I had to do that because spending a year thinking about people who are afraid, I couldn't do it year
Yeah.
in, year out. I don't
Yeah.
know how authors who write serial killer books can go to that dark place
Yeah, every
year
year
in,
with
year
yeah.
out.
Tarek,
It would
do you
just
want
be
to tell us?
I'm actually a serial killer.
All right, okay.
that would help.
I mean, it must have. Well, I say it must have. Was it? Was there a kind of catharsis to, or a
Yeah.
therapy almost to working through it again?
Yeah, I think so. I think writing about it definitely helped. What was harder was doing the press, because I'm
Okay.
quite a private person, really. And, you know, when your publicist says to you, you know, do you have a personal story that ties in with this book that we could, you know, and I was like, oh God, yes. So that was probably the worst bit, actually, because then you're not hiding behind a story and you're talking about yourself.
Yeah.
And, you know, people are listening or reading or whatever. But interestingly, so even though it was 17 years ago, I often still have dreams about this ex, or I did have frequent dreams about this ex, almost like he's kind of the bogeyman in my mind, you know, he just keep popping up. And I did find that after I'd written the book and done all the press and stuff, the dreams vanished for a while.
Okay.
I did have one a few weeks ago, but compared to the frequency with which he was appearing in dreams before, that's definitely lessened. So yeah, write about all the awful stuff that happens to you. free therapy.
Free therapy. Yeah.
There you go. So it's always the husband is coming out, but what are you working on? What is next in the pipeline?
So I am currently writing a very different book. There'll be an announcement in the trade press about it in October time. So I can't really say too much now.
That's fine. Exciting.
But it's quite a different kind of book.
Okay.
I'm not writing about a middle-aged woman, for one. I'm writing about a 24-year-old man, and it's partly set in the early 90s and partly set in the 80s,
Cool.
which up until now is something that I was sort of advised not to do. But
Why
it's
was that?
brilliant. I don't know. I think I don't know. I think I was kind of expected to write the same sort of book set in the now with a kind of middle-aged protagonist, even though, you know, my second book was about a bunch of 24-year-old women who go trekking the Annapurna Range in Nepal. I think once you kind of get into a rhythm of books that sell well, your editor's like, can you just write more of the same but different, you know?
Yeah.
And this is not the same, and it's definitely different. But I'm really excited about it because I think it's going to take my writing in a different direction. My agent's seen 15,000 words of it, and she said the writing was sophisticated and elevated, which is nice.
Very excited. Look forward to that in October.
Yeah, stretching my wings and trying something a little bit different. Still within psych suspense, but different.
Cool.
That sounds good. What was the last book that you read?
So the last book I read was a proof of the new Mark Edwards book. Yeah, he's
the second person who's just read that book.
Oh, really? Ah, brilliant.
Yeah.
You've heard all this before then. So Mark's just moved from Thomas and Mercer to Penguin Michael Joseph, and it's his first hardback, and it's called The Wasp Trap. And it's about a group of people who met in the 90s when they were working on a dating app for this sort of mad professor type in his house. And then one of them decided to do a side project where she created a psychopath test. And to test it out, they all took the test. And then something dark happens, and, you know, the app and the test are no more, and they don't meet up again until 20, 25 years later, after the professor dies, and they find themselves in a house at a dinner party, and not all of them are going to get out alive. So
Excellent.
I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a different sort of spin on psych thrillers, and I enjoy that. If I read something that I've not read a similar thing before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Excellent.
What about the last film that you watched?
I watched. I can actually remember because it was only the other night. I watched Conclave.
All right. Yeah.
Is it?
yeah.
I've not. I've read the book. I've not watched the film
Topical.
yet, though.
Yeah,
very topical.
it's free on Prime. And
Yeah, I
it's
saw
not-
that very quickly. Added to Prime.
Yeah, and it's not the sort of thing I would have chosen to watch or gone to the cinema. But because of what's happened recently, I thought, I'll give this a watch. And actually, it was brilliant.
Nice.
I thought it would be dry as, and I'll often stop a film 10 minutes in if it's not, grabbing
okay.
me.
Yeah.
But really, really good. I'd highly
nice.
recommend it. Yeah.
Nice.
Excellent. What about TV? What are you watching on TV at the moment?
So, actually, I could have mentioned this earlier, but I'm trying something a bit different writing this book. So, normally I listen to film soundtracks up in my office, through headphones, no lyrics. But Barnaby Walters, who is BP Walter, he watches telly.
Madness.
Okay.
He told
Yeah.
us this on the podcast.
Absolute
in fact.
madness.
Yeah.
In fact, I think I probably heard it on your podcast, and I just thought, watch I mean, I know Jill Mansell does it as well. She watches daytime TV and writes her book in a notebook. And I thought, I won't be able to do that. But I think one of the big issues that I have starting a book is going up to my office, sitting in front of the laptop and blank screen. So I thought, maybe I'll try Barnaby's way, and I'll just sit on the sofa in the living room and put something on the telly that, he said it has to be something that you're not too invested in or you've seen before. So I put on Hacks.
All right, yeah.
Yeah.
I've heard. I've not seen it, but I've heard.
Yeah,
It,
it's about an aging comedian and a young female comedian who gets cancelled on Twitter. And the aging comedian gets the younger one to help her kind of revive her career and write some jokes for her. Anyway, I put that on and I sat down with my laptop and I just started writing. And I was kind of aware of it in the background. And I think I'm on season 3 now because it's worked. I haven't been up to my office.
Amazing.
And I'm
Maybe we should try
21,000
this.
words into my book.
Are you? How close do you follow? Are you able to follow the plot of the TV show and write the book, or does the TV show? Do you kind of lose track of it afterward? Does it fade away?
I mean, there's something I have tried it with another program. I put on Marie Antoinette the other day, which I'd never watched before, but that was too gripping, and I had to, and it was distracting me. But Hacks is quite repetitive in they become close and they fall out, and then there's another obstacle, and you don't really have to pay attention to work out what's going on. So I don't know what I'm going to do when I've finished the series. Maybe just watch it again. I don't know.
You're not trapped in Hacks. That'll be your.
We thought it was mad when Barnaby told us, but obviously it does work.
Maybe I
For
should
some
try it.
strange people.
Well, the very, very last thing we always do is a super quick fire either or, with no right answers apart from one at the end. But we'll go for our first one. Let's go for romantic comedies or crime.
Crime.
Uh,
Been much more successful for me.
TV or cinema?
TV.
Night owl or early bird.
Massive night owl. I don't go to bed until about 2:00 in the morning at the earliest.
wow.
Jeez.
Sometimes it's 4. Then I have to get up at 7:30 to get my son ready for school. Then when he's left, he's secondary now. When he's left, I go back to bed for 3 hours. And then my day starts at about 12. So, you don't get more night owl than me, I don't think, apart from maybe Robert Smith.
I think there's both a night owl and an early bird if it's a 4:00 finish.
Well, I would normally ask music or no music, but you've answered that. TV is the answer. Fancy restaurant or takeaway?
Fancy restaurant. I love the food that you get at a fancy restaurant. I'm getting a bit sick of takeaways. maybe that's a sign we've had too many.
And the last one, paper book or ebook?
Paper book.
Everyone.
I've chosen
This
the wrong
has been the
one.
worst run of paper book ebook
Well,
for a long time. I actually can't think
When
of the
you
last
say
person who
worst
said
run-
ebook.
Yeah, that's because hardly anyone does.
Yeah.
I think I had about 5 people in there over 200 odd episodes.
Yeah, exactly.
Poor guys.
Well, thanks very much, Callie. That was a lot of fun.
That was
My
great
pleasure.
fun.
Thanks for having me on.
So I like people to learn off this podcast, but I'm not sure of all the things to have picked up from our previous 225 guests. The thing to pick up was right in front of the TV.
Have you tried that yet,
with
Mark?
movies on? No, I haven't. I haven't
No.
tried that yet. But whatever works, I guess.
I think I'm sure Barnaby said, to be fair to him, he puts on something that he's already seen before, right? Like it's not, you're not putting on the latest episode of Last of Us and then trying to write, because I know if I did that, I would get nothing done. So I was
Yeah.
watching TV.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I
I
guess
suppose
something-
it has to be something you can tune out largely.
Yeah,
and
a comfort movie.
Yeah, yeah.
Jingle All the Way. I think that's what I probably put on the background. I feel like I could do well with that.
But yeah, and also, we mentioned it at the start, but a very scary phone call
Oh,
from
God.
Darley.
Bizarre way of.
It shows you though that
Structuring it.
it wasn't even that long ago that agents had time to do things like that. I just don't think you would get agents like. I don't believe Darley Anderson would take the time, or someone of his status would even take the time to do that these
I
days, because
think
they're
that's
just
right.
swamped with
Yeah.
things now. So,
I just don't understand that. I mean, he must know. He must know what he's doing when you phone someone and you tear them apart at that for 20 minutes, and then you say, "Oh no. What are you talking about? Why on earth would you think that I don't want to sign you? I mean, hello."
exactly.
Bizarre.
But as we said, it all worked out.
It did all work out in the end. That's
So, yeah.
which is the main thing. Yeah.
So you can pick up Callie's latest book now. We'll put a link in the podcast description. As I said at the start, we do have a little bonus bit with Callie where she tells us about 5 books that influenced the latest book.
Yep.
You can watch that on our Patreon right now as well if you go and sign up for that. If you enjoyed today's episode, please do take the time to rate and review us on your favourite podcast app, as that always helps us to continue to get great guests on the podcast. And if on YouTube, follow, like, subscribe, all those things as well help as well. But I realise I've said this bit before we've even told you about next
just going to
week's
say,
guest.
Marco, you've totally skipped over.
Yeah.
And so that's what happens when you do 226 of these. It just
Exactly.
becomes just routine. Next week we're chatting with the wonderful Michael Cordy. He's written 7 novels. His latest novel is number 7, Manhattan Down, which is just out at time of recording. So have a look at that. If you enjoy kind of Michael Crichton-y, Dan Brown,
Yeah.
kind of fast-paced thrillers, techno thrillers, that sort of stuff. Really,
Arguably,
really
he
fun.
beat Dan Brown to
He
the
did
punch
beat Dan
with his
Brown.
first one.
Yeah,
Miracle
not
Strain
in a
or
fight. Yeah.
Messiah Code, is it? Well, maybe
What, 6
I don't know.
months?
Yeah, no, but it was definitely out, and it was a
Yeah.
big deal. But then, obviously, not as big a deal as the Da Vinci Code.
Which I guess is that thing of timing and luck. Isn't
Yeah.
it? 2 books of a very similar kind of concept. One
Yeah.
takes off,
Yeah.
becomes huge, super huge, and one does well, but isn't the same level. And
Yeah.
why is that? Who knows? It's just
So,
one of
and
those things.
it's also really interesting because he's someone that took a huge break from writing novels.
did,
a
yeah.
big number of years off from
14
writing
years
novels,
he took
and
off almost. Yeah.
has come back into it as well. So we chat to him about that. But again, it is he was a really fun person to chat with.
Yeah.
So it's a great chat. So please do tune in for that one.
Absolutely. And if you want to get in touch with us, if you have any questions or comments, please just send us an email. It's just podcast@rightgear.co.uk, or go onto social medias, search for @UKPage1, go onto our YouTube channel, leave us a little comment under there. All just the usual ways of getting in touch. Always like to hear from our fans.
Absolutely. And
Hi, Mum.
two things I should have said probably at the start when people are listening, rather than the 3 people that are still listening at this point in the podcast. We're recording a live show at Chimera in Edinburgh, as we always do
right.
every year at the Chimera Festival, which is Scotland's foremost SFF and horror literary festival.
Yep.
So, yeah, we're recording with John Gwynn, big author,
Very exciting.
and we're doing that in front of a live audience. And if you are at Chimera or in Edinburgh, you can come along. I think you need to. No, I don't think you even need to get a ticket. I think it's just free.
It's
If
free,
there's
isn't it?
room,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
can just come along. So, that'll be in early evening, late afternoon, early evening. Can't remember the exact time, but do come along to that. And the second thing is that there is going to be some exciting news regarding the
Very
podcast.
exciting news.
Um,
Big changes.
Big changes, but we're being very cautious, and we're not going to tell you what that is. So we're just building up the
What a tease.
anticipation.
What an absolute tease.
Exactly.
A total nothing announcement.
It's-
Big
it's-
things happening. Watch the space.
It's like the teaser trailers where it just shows you there was a teaser trailer for Mandalorian and Grogu, and all it was the title Mandalorian.
Oh, was it? I
and
never
Grogu
saw that.
with some music.
It's a teaser for the trailers coming tomorrow. A trailer.
yeah, that's
for
exactly
a
what
film
it is.
in 6 months' time.
That's exactly what it is. But yeah, no, keep your eyes and ears peeled on our
Yep.
social media, and there might be something about that very, very soon. But otherwise, have a great week, and we'll speak to you next episode.
See you later.
Well, we hope you enjoyed that episode. If you did, be sure to hit that thumbs up button and hit the subscribe button so you never miss an episode like these ones down here.
And if you want to get in touch, you can do so by finding us on our social media platforms up here, or drop us a comment way down below there.
But otherwise, thanks for listening and join us for the next episode.
See you later.